little bit of an explanation. What date and where and what time is American Winter showing? And I want everybody in this room to write it down. Because this...
Use the mic.
What date, where, and what time is American Winter showing? And everybody in this room, I want to see it. You've all got pens, you've all got paper. Write it down. And I'll explain here in a minute.
April 10th, 6:30 at the Norm Dick Center. And we're asking the people to RSVP so we know we have enough chairs.
And how many can you take?
At least a couple hundred.
Okay. This goes back to the telling of a story. That movie is a story. 8 people, 8 families. They're you, they're me, they're everybody. Okay, and their neighbors help them. They let them plug in. Well, God, I get so emotional when I talk about this. So it's us as a community stepping up. Somebody in that movie, their neighbor stepped up and said, you don't have any power? I'm sorry, here, plug into my house. So you have a refrigerator and you have a stove. You know, here's my water hose, so you have fresh water. Those little things make a difference. Go see this movie. Take a family member, take somebody from work, go see it, and then make a difference. Be the neighbor who plugs in your neighbor.
You have a question to follow that?
My question was the time.
The question is the time. Okay, great. I just want to make sure there wasn't a question coming.
Yes.
I saw a hand way in the back. I don't know who had a hand up in the back. No, they don't want to put their hand up now. Okay, I see a hand right up here.
So to add on to an action item, this woman is asking us to have an action item. You all represent various agencies with some influence in our community. What would your ad look like if you were going to get us on some sort of campaign in your agency, and then in our town, and then in our county, and maybe the state, to bring this to the consciousness of a bigger group, so we can really alleviate it.
So you're asking, if they were to design a campaign to work on poverty, what would their advertisement look like?
Right, we had advertising over here at one of these tables, talked about advertising works really well. So what ad would you put together?
Anyone have an answer for that? Maybe you already have an ad. You're all doing work in this area already. Okay, Monica?
I don't have an ad, but I think the symbol, that one of the symbols I think is one of the most powerful symbols I've ever seen, was what Richard Lemieux came up with out of Historic Breakfast at Sally's. A very simple 2 lines with the roof overhead, a symbol of a house. And I think that is such a powerful symbol of what we're all striving for.
Anyone else? Symbols, pictures, ads? Okay, I guess we don't have a lot of ads right now, but
Okay,
these aren't the creative types.
Sorry, I would say investing in people. Investing in people. That's what we try to do. That's what all of our social service organizations are trying to do, is make a community investment in people so that they can have opportunities and choices.
Michelle?
Yeah, I think one of our mission statements, and we have one of our board members here, Rebecca, is all kids, no exceptions. And we really live that every day, and are continuing to raise the expectations for that. But all kids, no exceptions.
Anyone else want to add?
I have a question.
I saw a hand over here. Someone really wanted to ask a question right over here.
No, I just, about this.
Oh, about this.
Who owns this, Life on the Edge?
Yeah, we like this.
Oh, Kathy, I don't know. Do you own it personally? Did you make it?
I created it. It's awesome.
I think it's strong.
Okay, other questions?
I don't think we can end poverty as long as the federal government pays a disabled person $700 a month, or $740, I think it is this year. And that's really starting with the top.
Are you suggesting that's not enough, or it's a disincentive?
That's not enough. There's no way a person can reasonably live on $700 and some dollars a month. Some people can. And yeah, and then the state gives you $199 or $197 to live until you can get Social Security if you're disabled. I think we have to start with really big changes to end poverty.
Do you have a question you want to ask them? Does anyone want to comment on that?
So I have a comment to that, and I love that you brought this up. So I think that, so you're right, number one, it takes way too long if you're disabled to be found to be disabled by Social Security so that you can start getting that ridiculously small amount of money to live on. But I think that everyone who is disabled should automatically get a Section 8 voucher to help pay for their housing. And unfortunately, there are people who think that when you are disabled, you do automatically get a public housing unit or a Section 8 voucher or some other kind of rent assistance, and that's not the case. So I think that what you've brought up is really important, and we do need to, that's one of the things that needs to be changed. One of the other things, of course, is that a single parent with 2 kids gets TANF benefit of about, what, $476 a month. Who can live on $476 a month as a single adult, let alone with 2 kids? So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I see a hand right here.
Okay, so, is it on?
Yeah.
Honestly, do we think that we can change poverty in a capitalistic society? That's the question here. The top 1% win and it all trickles down. So how can we do it in that kind of political reign?
So you're asking if we think that poverty can be solved in the type of economic system that we have today. Anyone want to answer that?
Sure. When we recognize that human beings are our best capital, we can totally do that, yeah. The problem right now is that there's too much of a focus on currency as our most important asset. When in reality, I think our country's best asset, our most strong source of economic independence is our people. And when we start making those investments in our human capital, which includes all of our human capital, then we can make a difference in the capitalist system.
There's an advertisement.
Now there's an ad. Anyone else, Michelle?
I'm gonna go back to the ad, I apologize, because I don't think I can answer the capitalist question. But back to the ad, it just struck me, do you know the commercials on TV, right, that talk about sponsoring a child overseas? And they're very heart-rending. And I would say, I would love to see a commercial to sponsor a child in South Kitsap. Do you know, and I think people would respond to that and maybe don't realize how dire things are for many families. And so maybe that's a way to do it.
Okay, let's take you next, but there is a hand way in the back. All the way to the back.
Sorry I disappeared earlier, this necessity is life. I teach in the public school system, and the population with whom I work is over 50% homeless. And one of the things that I see a huge need for in the community and people who live in poverty and the people who are homeless is one of the things that I know my colleagues and I work very hard to give our students. And that's teaching them how to self-advocate. Is there something that we can be doing as a group, as agencies, as an integral open family, if you will, doing to give these tools to these people who, like my students, for whom this is such an odd concept? And how would we go about doing that?
Do y'all understand the question? Anyone want to answer that? You've stumped me. All right, Larry.
I'm glad to see that you are teaching those skills. And I really think those are important skills that we need to be teaching throughout our schools, as well as some other basic living skills I think are very important that sometimes we don't get to. And then I think certainly we do with adult programs, for example, with Head Start and other programs where we work with parents and encourage them to advocate for themselves and for their kids, be good advocates for the kids in school, are things that we do. And I think with other programs like Stewart's Microenterprise program over here, where as people develop their own businesses, they are a big part of that is learning to advocate for their business. So I'm just saying I think that is important. We do some of that with our adult populations that we serve, but certainly starting doing that in a positive way, not to the exclusion of all of our peers, but to in a way to help put our best foot forward for success in this world. I think it's really important.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Scott?
So I think people do this. We have nurses that visit low-income families. One of the programs is you have to be a first-time mom, low income, which isn't hard to meet, and then that nurse goes out. You have to be a professional, and so it has to be a nurse who's trained to help that mother advocate. And I think that's a long-term process. It's not just teaching someone to advocate, it's having a mentor that believes in you, a program that says it works, and some background on these. So the nurse-family partnership, this program we're talking about, actually shows for every dollar invested in this mom and these kids or kid, that the payback in less juvie retention, ICW or CPS referrals, all that, it works. So I think we need to champion those. These are the first programs to get cut when funding goes out the door because they don't have impact right now. They have impact 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So I think the direct answer to your question is we need to champion those programs that have people learn advocacy and support the mentoring of those advocacy programs.
Okay, I'm taking another question here, and then I have a question.
So I was listening to the woman over there saying that, we can't end poverty until the federal government gives somebody more than $740 to live on, and the state gives somebody more than $190 to live on. And as I was listening to her say that, and I'm a credit union, we're cooperatives, we live people, but one of the things that struck me is that I think one of the base roots of the issue is that those programs were never meant to sustain people. They were meant to be a temporary fix so that people could get a foothold. So $740 is not what you're supposed to live on. It's supposed to help you live. You're supposed to be doing some other things. And so as the panel, I feel like, my heart's just beating like crazy because it's upsetting to me. Because it also stirs something in my own head that says, poor people are a nuisance. We don't want them on our streets. We want police officers to take. I live in Olympia, Washington, where downtown Olympia is strewn with homeless people. We know the problem's there, but we really don't want to look at it. We want to see it on TV where we can send a check for $25 a month, and but we don't want to see it. And most of us don't have the wherewithal to do anything about it. So as we look at our community leaders, what do you think will be the cultural mind shift that takes poverty out of this? It's a nuisance, it's a pain, we don't want to look at it, we don't want to see it. To how do we get people to engage on a personal level, maybe not at this hierarchy level where we cure everybody, but to just make the difference that you can? And how do you see yourself as leaders in that mind shift, that change?
It looks like Michelle wants to answer that question.
You sound surprised, Cole. So no, I just want to mention something, and I assume we have some common understanding about this, but just to address your issue, how many of you have heard of No Child Left Behind? Yes, okay. So, and the author was Ted Kennedy. And Ted Kennedy authored the bill as a result of a speech given by Alan Greenspan, which said something like this, right? That in the 1950s, we had about 6.2 workers for every retired person. And Social Security was fine. We actually had a robust Social Security. People were working and putting money into it, and many more people were working than were requiring benefits. The projection for 2014, at the time Alan gave his speech, Mr. Greenspan, I don't know him personally, Mr. Greenspan gave his speech, was that by 2014 we would have 1.4 workers for every retiree. Therefore, in his opinion, every child needed to be educated to be able to work. And if every child could work, we could sustain a Social Security structure to take care of every retiree. So that was really an economic genesis for an educational policy that we're all now living with in a sort of fractured form, right? Because by 2014, no school in the country is graduating 100% of their kids at the standard the federal government expects. And you expect, and we expect. So I think philosophically, somehow there has to be a place for everyone, and the employment piece, which goes back to the woman whose name I cannot pronounce, who gave us the data around employment being so very important for housing, right? And so, Streiskup, yes. And so that is, I think, very important. And so from an educational standpoint, I think it's critical. The policy shift we need to make is to make sure every child, I keep going back to the kids, but that's my responsibility, every child is educated and capable of entering some productive workforce. So.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, Kirsten.
What you made me think about is that we have a room here of 200 odd people, and I did not mean to say that. Did not mean to. 200, about 200 people. I'm sorry. I didn't even catch that. We have about 200 people in this room, and each one of you has had experiences and influences in your life that has led you to be here today, that has caused you to have a mindset and a paradigm shift that embraces the idea that we should make a difference, that it is worthy of our time and effort to help all people. So I guess I would turn that question back to you and say, each one of us, we've had that happen to us. What was that happened to us? And how do we share what happened to us with other people so that they can have that same epiphany and come to the right way of thinking? I say that.
I'm going to ask another question if you guys don't mind holding yours. Oh, sure, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to provide a clarification. The question about living on $740 a month or something like that, that's for people who are disabled. And so these are people who really can't work. And so that's the safety net that our government provides for someone who becomes disabled at an age before they've worked 40 quarters. And so I don't know the statistics, but I would say the vast majority of those folks are disabled due to a mental illness. And so
I just think that, isn't it just by nature of the fact that it's only $740 a month, doesn't that basically say we want to pretend like we're helping, but we're really not, because nobody can live on $740 a month. So I think that was it's like.
okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I wanted to make sure that you, that you
Oh,
knew
yeah,
that
no,
those.
I get it, I just.
Yeah, okay.
I wonder.
Okay, one more comment.
I'm sorry. I need to answer that because the average income of the people that we see at the Housing Solutions is $700 a month. About a third of the people we see have no income whatsoever. So when people come in and they have Social Security, unless it's a large family, we can get them housed. We're not going to get them affordable housing. They're going to be spending 60, 70, 80% of their income on that room for rent or that apartment and relying on food stamps for food and food banks and going down to Peninsula. But at the end of the day, I'm not advocating $745 as the right amount, but I still think that there are some options for some of these folks for housing, and we have to find them every day.
So my question, I'm going to take us back to a more fundamental question. And we're going to do this quick, and I'm going to ask each one of you to answer. An answer of a minute or less. You ready?
So yes or no?
No, it's not yes or no, but you guys can do it. So how do you personally, or how does your organization actually define intergenerational poverty? And is intergenerational poverty different from just poverty? 1 minute or less if you can. And let's start at Larry's end this time.
Well, we work with a number of government funding sources, and so typically there's an income level. You compare size of household with income, and that then becomes a definition for poverty. And by the way, different government agencies define it in different ways. So I think that's the practical way that we look at poverty. Intergenerational poverty, then I see as somebody, at least 2 years, I mean, at least 2 generations that a household has lived in poverty, essentially. So if grew up in poverty and is still in poverty now as a family with adults, then I would see that as intergenerational poverty.
So I think that we were looking at intergenerational poverty. The definition is obvious. It's gone on for more generations, obviously. Then situational poverty, which is often related to case number 2, for example, or case number 3 that we looked at with the woman who lost her license and so forth. I think from our standpoint, we generally look at intergenerational poverty as having had less access to resources, perhaps less education over time, and perhaps